Good morning, my name is Daniel Heery. I'm from Cybermoor Services. I'm also the Chief Exec of Charge My Street. We're a new social enterprise which is focused particularly on getting charging points, charging infrastructure onto terrace streets, areas where there's lots of flats. Really important because we've heard a lot about people charging up who've got driveways, but for large parts of County Durham where people are in those terraces, they're going to miss out on a way to get their electric vehicles and get charged up. Before I start, does anyone here actually live on a terrace or in a flat? Yeah? Okay, maybe about a third, about a quarter of people. And have any of you got electric vehicles? No, okay. How many people have got EVs, just out of interest? Yeah, so a few, but not the two groups aren't overlapping. And that's exactly where I started off. Let me just get the slides going. That's where I started off about a couple of years ago. I live in Lancaster, but all these people were in the same boat. We all wanted to get electric cars, but we were all living in on terrace streets, so we couldn't plug in anywhere. I phoned up Lancashire County Council and said, what do we do about this? Can I put a charge point outside my house? And they said, well, no one's ever asked us that before. We'll go and find out. 30 days later, I phoned them back again and they said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And I said, well, what do I do? And they said, well, we don't know, we can't help you. And to me, I've done a lot of work in the past on community benefit, social enterprises, how we actually get communities involved in solving these problems, particularly around rural broadband. And it just struck me that a lot of the techniques that we'd use to get broadband into rural areas could also be used for the charge points, but across the piece, particularly in urban areas as well, where people just don't have access to the infrastructure. So we started off, we got about 4 charge points put in. We learnt a huge amount on the way as we were going through that process, and we set up Charge My Street as a community benefit society. So we're not making profits. Any money we make gets ploughed back into putting new charge points in. And recognised there was a lot of interest, lots of people getting in touch saying, can you come and work with us to do our community? But as we were starting off, it was quite difficult. Then this money came along from central government through the scaling on-street charging project, and we thought this would be a great one to work with some other local authorities to understand, could this be replicated not just in Lancaster and Cumbria, but also across the Pennines in County Durham as well. So the key thing is really, we've got people out there that are interested, they want to do something, but they just don't know where to turn. There's, on the one hand, there's councils that are really stretched with austerity. They don't have spare officers about who can actually help them with this. But they want to get an electric vehicle, and we've got a small window here, as we know from the climate emergency. We've got about 10 years to try and turn this thing around. And if someone says, well, I need to get a new car, I'm going to keep it for 6 years, and it's not electric, then that means we've got a bit of a problem. We need to give people the tools to actually get these charge points in now and actually start that switch across from petrol and diesel to electric. So the project is really around giving people those tools, but it's also looking at how we do some innovative stuff as well around the infrastructure that's going in, how we combine it with things like renewables, because we know communities have been really forward thinking in terms of getting solar schemes into village halls, renewable energy through like wind turbines. So how do we try and harness a lot of that innovation and drive and enthusiasm and make it focused on electric vehicle charging points as well? Huge amount to learn there. And I know from sort of previous work in County Durham that there's like a huge amount of interest in this, a huge amount of innovation going on. I know even like things like the NUM with their sheltered accommodation, they're looking at how they make all those zero carbon. It's how we actually bring in quite a wide range of stakeholders and people who you wouldn't normally consider to be into this sort of stuff, how we get them on board, because that's the only way we're going to make the huge steps that we need to take in the coming years. I mentioned here about air pollution as well, because if you look on maps, and we've done that as part of the project, a lot of places where you have quite poor air quality, your air quality management areas, actually overlap with these terrace streets and quite low incomes. These electric cars, they cost nothing to run. I'm charging mine up outside Asda today. It's going to cost me $120 for like a full tank. One of the things I've come across over the years working in the Durham Dales is people get really clobbered by the price of diesel. You go to any sort of public meeting, particularly with farmers, and they'll say, the fuel prices are killing us. This is a really good way to overcome some of that fuel inequality. So that this ticks so many different boxes from a policy agenda. I've mentioned a couple of the challenges already. I think, is anyone here from like a local authority or working in highways? Yeah? Does anyone ever contact you about parking stuff? Because it is a really contentious issue. If you want to get people engaged with local politics, charge them to park outside their own house. It's a huge issue. I know that it certainly creates a brake on these schemes, because both the elected members and the officers who are dealing with this say, look, we don't want to open that tin with parking changes on it, because we know we'll just get completely inundated with people. That's a huge break on this, though, because councils and highways authorities are hugely important in terms of where these charge points go, how they're used, and that's it's something that within me as an individual, I can't do anything about it. I can't get more resource for that highways team. But what we can do is find other places, because the charge points don't have to go on streets. They can go on community centres, they can go on village halls, they can go on churches, in pub car parks. And it all comes back to that, that criteria about it being, we need to be 5 minutes away, because what we don't, this might work in some cases, but it's not a great solution, trailing cables across the pavements. So we actually did this. We did this at the start of the year. We went out, we had Peace in the Northern Echo, and we said to people, could you suggest some charging points in your community? And we said it could be shops, it could be pubs, community centres, and we had a huge response. Lots of people went onto the Charge My Street website, registered these sites. So there is a lot of interest in there. Some of them weren't really that appropriate because, for whatever reason, we knew the property owners wouldn't be up for it. But there is a huge number of opportunities there. And what we've been able to do is combine that with other bits of data. So if you start to map that against all the areas of relatively high density housing where the terrace streets are, you start to see a pattern. Then you can also look at these potential charge point locations where they could go around those sites. At the moment, the main people who are buying these electric cars are people who are quite well off. As the price comes down, as more second-hand ones come onto the market, I think that will change. But for the time being, if you look at income distribution, that's also an indicator of how likely people are going to be to actually take up the EVs. And so for all these sites, we did a bit of an analysis. So for this one here, you've got, you can see there's a car park there. You've got the Google Earth thing. You can see things like politics as well. If you've got green councillors, then that also gives you a sense that the people in that area are quite well predisposed to environmental issues. But there's a high degree of you knock out a lot of sites as you go through this process, because this is just looking at pins on a map. What we're really interested in is seeing where are these sort of charge point champions, where are the people a bit like me and the people you saw on the first slide who are really engaged with this, who actually want to do it for their community. Because that's the key. You know, this isn't about technology or politics or anything. It's about how you engage those people who've got a really, you know, quite a strong civic mentality, who want to go out and do something for their community. And it can be all sorts of things. We talked earlier about tourism and getting people into the area. I mean, amazing, you know, last time I was in Bishop Auckland, it didn't look like this. Huge amount of investment's gone on. It's great that you've also got the charge points as well to encourage those visitors who want to come here. We've seen in some of the Cumbrian villages where this has been installed, families saying, I've got the whole of the Lake District to go to, but I'm going to stop in that village and use that cafe while my car charges up. So there is a really good link starting to emerge between that availability of charging infrastructure and destination management as well, and some of the spin-offs there. So just from an installation point of view, it's been quite interesting working with communities on this, because this is a village hall in Broughton-in-Furness in Cumbria where we installed it. And you have to go through quite a complex process, because that hall has a number of people who are using it. While you've got a committee, people change on that committee. There's bits of things like metal cabinets that need to go in. You've got to get things painted on the floor. So on one hand, it's a case of, yeah, we're just going to stick a beige-coloured box on the side of the building. But on the other hand, you're working with local people who feel quite passionate about things. So it's really important to have them engaged and as part of the journey. Otherwise, the thing is, it's not going to get used. It's about having that local involvement. There was one slide that I skipped over a bit earlier, but we did some survey work in County Durham as well earlier in the year, and it showed, I think what came out of it was people were willing to walk 5 minutes to a charge point. So they can come home at night, plug in a local community centre, and then walk 5 minutes. They're quite happy to do that. About 70% said they'd do it. So I think that's, you know, we're working on really a good evidence base there. I think the complexity of this, it doesn't need to be complex, and part of the SOSCI project is to work with Vattenfall and the other partners to make that as straightforward as possible for those communities that want to engage. So I suppose the final slide, love you to get more involved with SOSCI. We've got, but I think there's other ways that you can help out as well. Part of it is just about spreading the word, getting people to think about making that switch to EVs. I was at a meeting the other day in Penrith, and as we were finishing, the woman who was closing up the cafe said, I've got to go and buy a new car because my old one's blown up. And we sort of had a bit of a laugh about it. And then I thought, why didn't I tell her to go and get an electric car? Because she was probably just going to go out and try and buy an old banger for a couple of grand, which may have saved her a bit of money in the short term, but over the long term, it's probably no better for her. So it's about trying to get people to start thinking about buying an electric car. We've got that site, the Charge My Street website has the ability for you to suggest sites, and if you do that, we'll get back in touch with you, or if you know someone else that's interested, then we'll get back in touch with you about it. So think about it. Use your intelligence about where could that charge point go in your village or town, and you're not tied into anything. We're not going to hold you to that suggestion. But the more sites we have going into the system, then the more data we get. And maybe that it's rubbish, but it could be that it's like a really brilliant gem that we can actually work with and could help to shift a lot more people over to EVs in that community. And then if that all sounds a bit too hard for you, just please follow us on social media, because that's really useful as well. And if you haven't got, we saw about a quarter of the audience have got electric vehicles. Go and check them all out today. Try and think about making that shift. It's changing all the time, so even if you looked at it a couple of years ago, it's worth revisiting it now, because the technology's improved, the range has improved. The reasons for not having one are getting smaller all the time, and the reasons for having one are going up all the time. I'm not going to do any questions now, but we'll come back together at the end. Thanks very much.